The movies like to show cowboys roasting steak over a clean campfire, while tipping their hat to the stars. But here's the truth: when food ran out, and it ran out often, cowboys didn't dine. They survived, and survival meant eating things that would make a vulture gag. We're talking rattlesnakes, boiled leather, moldy beans, and meat so old it apologized before being chewed. When the cattle were dead, the bacon gone, and the beans frozen solid, cowboys turned to the land, their animals, their boots, and sometimes each other. Because in the Wild West, hunger didn't knock. It kicked the door in and licked the plate. The empty chuck wagon let start at the top. On cattle drives or long-range rides, a chuck wagon followed the herd. A rolling kitchen stuffed with flour, lard, beans, bacon, and misery. It worked fine. Until it didn't. If a storm washed away supplies, if the herd stampeded and trampled the wagon, if they got lost or robbed, suddenly the kitchen went cold. No more biscuits. No more bacon grease. No more coffee. Now what? Welcome to the snake buffet snakes. Lots of them. Especially rattlesnakes. Cowboys hunted them not for sport, but for survival. The meat was white, stringy, and full of tiny bones. But it didn't spoil easily. And they were everywhere. Cooking a snake was simple. Cut off the head, don't forget the fangs, peel the skin like a boot. Wrap it around a stick, roast it over fire tree. Not to puke when chewing, some cowboys called it prairie chicken to make themselves feel better. One journal even describes a cowboy cutting a raw snake into thin strips and wearing it around his neck in the sun. Jerky dash on dash the dash go. Was it tasty? No. Was it food? Barely. Was it better than dying? Absolutely. Leather, not just for saddles. When things got really bad, cowboys boiled leather. We're talking boot straps, saddle flaps, bridle parts, anything made from untreated hide. They'd boil it for hours, scraping off mud, salt, and horse sweat until it softened into a chewy, glue-like mush. Some added grass or pine needles for flavor. One story tells of a cowboy who boiled his own belt, then passed out from the smell before he could eat it. But boiled leather did the job. It filled the belly, barely, and sometimes it brought back memories of better meals. Like that time you chewed on your gloves by accident. Dead meat, questionable timing, starving. Cowboys didn't ask questions like, is this safe? They asked, how green is it? Exactly. If they found a dead animal that hadn't been picked clean by coyotes, they might carve off a chunk, scrape off the mold, and roast it to black. Real black. Like charcoal with hair black. One man recalled eating meat that was blue on the outside, pink on the inside, and regret all over. Sometimes the meat was from their own herd. A cow that collapsed during a snowstorm or broke its leg on a slope. Other times, they'd come across half-frozen carcasses that looked half-promising. The trick was to cook it long enough to kill the guilt. Grease, the West's only superfood. Forget protein shakes. Cowboys loved animal fat. Rendered fat, lard, or tallow became the emergency ration of choice. They'd scoop it from old pot, shave it off meat bag, scrape it from the bottom of the chuck wagon, and yes, they'd eat it plain, by the spoon, or mix it with flour and water for a doughy lump called grease cakes. One terrifying recipe included fat, black coffee, salt, and snow, stirred together until it resembled cold porridge. It kept you going. It also clogged your soul, but fat burned slow and gave energy. And unlike meat, it didn't rot as fast. So cowboys carried hunks of it wrapped in waxed cloth or stuffed into tin cans ashore. It turned their breath rancid and made their stomachs scream, but it kept them upright. Desperate measuration, everything else was gone. The truly desperate started thinking outside the corral. Some ate candle wax, horse feed, pine bark, and scraped off rocks, frozen bugs they found stuck to their saddle, even their own tobacco boiled like tea. Then drunk cowboys didn't care what it tasted like. They cared if it didn't kill them, yet. One survivor described eating pages from an old wanted poster dipped in bacon fat. He said it tasted like ink and shame. Let's say you're out on the trail. You've eaten the snake, you've chewed your belt, you've burned the fat and swallowed every bean you didn't spill in the snow. You're still hungry. Your horse is eyeballing you now, and you're starting to wonder if that weird gray lump in the bottom of your saddlebag is edible. Spoiler, it is. Welcome to the worst cookbook in the West. Part 2. The moldy bean gambit beans were a cowboy staple. Cheap, easy to transport, full of protein. The problem, they spoiled fast in damp sacks, especially during long rides or wet winters. Imagine this, you open your last bag of beans, half of them are fuzzy. The other half are stuck together in a moldy brick, and the smell? Think sweaty socks boiled and sad nested. That stop cowboys, not a chance. They'd scrape off the worst, rinse them in stream water, and boil the rest into a gray mush. One account calls it bean glue. Another called it punishment porridge. They sometimes added tobacco ash or leftover bacon drippings to mask the rot. It worked. Barely. The results were ugly, but edible, and in the Wild West, that was gourmet. Bread that bites back. Next came the hardtack, a kind of super biscuit meant to last forever. Spoiler, it didn't. It just outlived the men eating. It stored in tin boxes or flour sacks. Hardtack grew mold, went soft, or got infested with weevils. Cowboys often had to tap the biscuit before eating, not for superstition, but to knock out bugs. Sometimes they'd hold the biscuit to the fire and listen for the pops. That meant the weevils were cooking. If it wasn't bug-ridden, it was stone hard. Soaking in coffee, fat, or hot water was the only way to chew it without shattering your teeth. One old cook said, "If it doesn't crack your molars, it's not real cowboy bread." Enter the hero, pemmican. When things got really bad, some cowboys pulled out the nuclear option. Pemmican. Originally made by Native American tribes, pemmican was a mixture of dried, pulverized meat, buffalo, deer, or whatever died first, rendered fat, sometimes dried berries. If you were lucky, the result, a greasy, calorie-dense meat paste that could last months or even years without refrigeration. To make it, cowboys would hang strips of meat over smoke fire, pound it into powder with rock's melt, animal fat in pots, mix it together until it formed a brick of survival, wrapped in hide or stuffed into bags. Pemmican didn't need cooking. You just bit into it and hoped your stomach didn't revolt. It was dense, greasy, sour, and chewy like cold candle wax, but a handful could fuel a man all day. Some cowboys grew to love it. Others said it tasted like jerky soaked in old soap. The pocket method. Pemmican had one problem. It froze, rock solid. So cowboys developed the pocket thaw. Carry it in your shirt or armpit until it softened. Convenient, yes. Hygienic, not even close. One cattle hand admitted he kept his pemmican between his socks and bare feet while riding, to keep it warm and moist. He also said he was never invited to share a campfire again. Trail mix. From Helson trail cooks tried to improve pemmican by adding extras. Things like dried chili powder, crushed tobacco leaves accidentally. They claimed coffee grounds, ground up bones for texture. One crew made peppermint pemmican using stolen candy and powdered beef. It lasted for months. It also gave 3 men the runs for a week. The grease bag special. Bay and pemmican. Some cowboys made grease bags, literal leather pouches filled with fat and dried meat. The outside became so oily it could repel rain. They'd bite into it like jerky, or slice off chunks with a knife. It kept them going. But the smell. Imagine raw bacon stored inside a boot that lived in a fireplace. One cowboy was known for trading pemmican and grease bags in exchange for clean socks, because even he couldn't stand his own cooking anymore. Why this work? It is disgusting as it sounds. Pemmican and spoiled food kept cowboys alive. They weren't eating for joy. They were eating to ride another mile, to climb another hill, to stay awake on night watch. Calories mattered more than taste. Fat meant fuel. Mold meant flavor. And when food was scarce, pemmican was gold. So what happens when even pemmican runs out? When the chuck wagon's empty, your jerky stash is gone, and your horse is giving you that don't even think about it look. Simple. You get creative. Cowboys didn't just eat what was edible. They ate what wasn't supposed to be food at all and made it work. The blood was warm, at least when meat was too frozen to cook, or when they didn't have time to cook. Cowboys turned to something horrifyingly efficient: fresh animal blood. They'd slit the neck of a cow, calf, or deer, catch the blood in a pan or hat, and drink it while it was still warm. Sometimes they mixed it with hot water and fat, calling it cowboy broth. It was salty, metallic, and thick, but it delivered calories, iron, and heat fast. One journal from a trail drive simply reads, "We drank the bloodworm. It kept the snow out of our lungs." The worst part, it wasn't even the most desperate thing they did that week. Vermin on the menais. They ate rats, not city rats, prairie rats, gophers, squirrels, and anything with eyes that moved slow enough. Trapped, skinned, and spit roasted over a twig. They were small, but surprisingly edible. Some cooked them whole and just pulled off the fur after charring. One cowboy said it tasted like burnt sock meat, but filled the hole. And then there were skunks. Only the brave or stupid tried to cook one. First you had to remove the scent glands, fail, and your dinner was ruined forever. Succeed, and you got something like greasy raccoon with a hint of regret. The infamous boot meal when nothing else was left, and they meant nothing. Cowboys boiled their boots. Leather softened after hours of boiling. They'd scrape the surface, slice it into strips, and chew, and chew, and chew. Most didn't swallow it. They just chewed until their jaw hurt, then spat out the pulp. Some swallowed small bits. Others added mud, wild onions, or ash to try and fake flavor. In one legendary story, a cowboy cut up his entire saddle, boiled it into soup, and served it to his bunkmates without telling them. They called it hide broth. He called it Tuesday animal. Organs, hooves, and heads. When meat ran out, everything else became fair game. Cowboys ate tongues, especially from deer or cattle. Tasted okay when roasted. Brains, cooked in pans or roasted directly in the skull. Eyes, rich in fat, soft like jelly, usually swallowed whole. Hooves, boiled for hours to make gelatin, called trail jelly. Stomachs and intestines, washed, tied off, and stuffed like sausages. You think you're tough? Try eating a raw cow eyeball with warm blood and no salt. They didn't like it, but they didn't die. That was the point. Stolen scraps and burnt bones if they passed through a burned settlement or battlefield. Cowboys sometimes scavenged, charred, bone-sash-covered and goods-written vegetables still hanging on the vinebroken barrels of grain. Mixed with dirt, they'd rinse off what they could, grind it with knives, and cook it into sludge. Even burned beans and flour soaked in rainwater were better than starving. They'd scrape the inside of old pots, eat leftover grease, and lick salt off leather straps. Coffee beans, tobacco, and anything that burned. Sometimes cowboys chewed coffee beans raw, swallowing them like pills for energy. Other times, they boiled tobacco leaves, strained the liquid, and drank it. The result? A nauseating, bitter drink that gave a jolt of energy and the runs at the same time. They even tried boiling canvas tent scraps made from animal fiber. Horse feed mixed with greasy residue from old campfires for salt and minerals. One crew reportedly ground up charcoal and sprinkled it on meat to cover the rot. They survived. They probably never trusted each other again. Cowboys didn't eat for to steady, didn't say grace. They didn't savor. They didn't ask, "Is this safe?" They asked, "Can I get it down?" Because in the West, starvation didn't rhyme with a warning. It came silent, fast, and final. And if you weren't ready to eat things your own horse wouldn't sniff, you didn't make it. You might think cowboys were all about freedom, honor, and riding into the sunset. But when the food ran low and your stomach turned on you like a rattlesnake in a boot, those romantic ideals vanished real fast. Because hunger changes people. It doesn't just eat your strength, it eats your trust. And on the trail, where every crumb mattered, a missing biscuit could start a war. The ration line was sacred. Every drive had a cook, and the cook had one sacred job: make food stretch. That meant cutting biscuits in halves or quarters, watering down stew with snow-scraping burnt beans off the pot for extra flavor, pretending nothing was wrong when three guys shared one spoon. Daily ration was usually small, sometimes half a biscuit, a ladle of stew, and a gulp of blackened coffee. Enough to move. Barely anyone who took more than their share. They didn't just get yelled at, they got punched, banished, or in extreme cases, shot. The biscuit thief. One of the most infamous cowboy crimes was simple: stealing food. A man who snuck an extra piece of jerky or hoarded pemmican in his boot risked losing his teeth, or worse. There's a real story of a cowboy who took an extra biscuit in his saddlebag, got caught, and was tied to a tree for 2 days with nothing but snow to eat when they let him go. They gave him his own biscuit. It had rocks baked into it. Lesson learned: Grease politics. You think gold is valuable? Try bacon grease in winter. Grease wasn't just for cooking. It was fuel, protection, medicine, and currency. Cowboys used it too. Grease saddle, soil boots, waterproof coat, street frost, bit of barter. For other food, a tin of saved grease could buy you warm beans, a shot of whiskey, or a turn near the fire. Some trail cooks locked the grease tins at night. Others hid them in their bedrolls. There were stories of men drinking bacon drippings straight from the pan when no one was watching. Grease was survival. And if you messed with a man's grease, you might not wake up the next morning scavenging as a team sport. Cowboys got creative when hunger set in. Whole groups would send men ahead to check for abandoned camps, search the trail for dead animals, or drop supplies forage for roots, onions, wild berries, climb into caves for bats or lizards, crack open old logs to eat insects or grubs. Feed, divide everything, even if it was just a handful of scorched cornmeal and one half-dead squirrel. You might laugh, but when 5 grown men sit around a skillet cheering for one mouse, that's not comedy. That's starvation. The pact of the pot around the fire. There was one rule: nobody eats alone. Cowboys shared from the same pot, same spoon, same burned mess of stew, not because they wanted to, but because it kept fights from breaking out. The moment one man kept a portion for himself, suspicion brewed. Fights followed. Knives flashed. Sometimes the cook disappeared. And yes, there are real accounts of crews losing a man overnight. One story says, "We think he ran off," or someone fed him to the fire. Either way, we had bigger problems. What starvation did to men, it made them slower, meaner, paranoid. They argued over imagined biscuits, fought over imaginary stew, and dreamed of meals they hadn't tasted in years. Some hallucinated, others forgot how to speak. One cowboy refused to eat unless someone else took the first bite, convinced every meal was poisoned. And the worst, men who got food but refused to share. They hid it in saddlebags, bedrolls, and even inside their hats. When caught, it never ended peacefully. Hunger left scars when the food finally came back. After a town, a trade, a miracle. Not every man recovered. Some hoarded dry bread under their blankets, refused to eat hot meals, say to fast. Then collapsed. Sets of grease and handkerchiefs for weeks woke up in the night, counting beans in their pockets. Starvation changes your brain. Cowboys who lived through it learned to never waste, never trust a full belly, and never laugh at another man's snake stew, because they knew it could be them next week. The final bit of Wild West wasn't a place for picky eaters. You didn't get menus. You didn't get choices. You got what didn't run away fast enough, or what hadn't started rotting to hard. And if it burned, stank, crawled, or stared back, but had calories, you thanked it for its service and swallowed hard.